So maybe you've heard the commission lawsuits and things that are coming to fruition with buyer's agents disappearing and all of the things that are going on with the buyer's agent commission. First and foremost, as we've talked about on this channel, none of that is final, and we are moving through the process. The DOJ still has to sign off that, there will be different things handed down by the National Association of Realtors. But if you're a buyer thinking about ditching the buyer's agent because either A, you can't afford it or think you don't need it, we're going to talk about everything you need to know to hopefully be successful in that mission. Stay tuned. What's up, guys? I'm Jeremy Kane with eXp Realty. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are live on all sorts of different channels. And if you're watching on the replay on YouTube, definitely throw me a like, a comment, a subscribe. Over there, we talk a ton about the Denver market across all of these channels. And I hope that we are bringing you the most up-to-date information so you can be the best, most informed consumer that you can possibly be. If you're interested in connecting or want to chat about a situation, buying, selling, investing, all the things, there's always a link to reach out to me in the description. So I would love to chat with you. Throw me a comment below, shoot me a DM, wherever you're watching, and we can go from there. So let's kind of get into this. And I first want to say that buyer's agents technically under this new lawsuit are absolutely not going to go away. Regardless, it may change. You may as a buyer be asked to pay a portion or all of the commission if this lawsuit is, if this settlement is agreed upon. So you hear a lot of the news headlines are saying the real estate agent commission structure is changing forever, massive overhauls. You hear the president talking about how it's going to save buyers money, which is probably not the case, as we'll talk about here. However, we will definitely go into it. So as we kind of break this down and do what we're doing, we have to understand that a buyer's agent is there specifically in order to protect the buyer's best interest by nature of our exclusive right to buy that we sign here in Colorado. So having an advocate is absolutely important. Similar to a divorce situation, you would not go into a divorce situation using the same attorney as your divorcing spouse, and so on. So it may change a little bit. However, ultimately, people will want representation navigating probably one of the most difficult and expensive purchases they make in their lifetime. So it's probably not going to go away, but if you're feeling up to it and you feel like you've done it before, and you want to try and save yourself a buck, that's what I'm here to tell you about right now. And so first and foremost, as a buyer who is out there unrepresented, you'll need to communicate directly with the listing agent who is an agent of the seller, representing the seller's best interest at the time when you reach out to them. Certainly, there could be listings that go on the market as transaction broker. We don't have to get into those relationships in this. So most cases you will have to reach out to the agent who represents the seller's best interest and find a time that within their busy schedule, they can come unlock the door, get you in. They're going to unlock the door. They're going to show you. They might provide comps if they, have them, and, depending on how the house was priced, some may make sense, some may not, but they're basically gonna maybe give you those, probably not, because they're representing the seller, and you're going to have to figure out what the value is of the price. Oh, not to mention that we have limited inventory. So you're going to have to figure out what you're gonna offer, how to write up an offer. They may offer to write it for you if they're going into the transaction broker field or the customer field. That is a very important thing to know as a buyer who's unrepresented. They cannot represent the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. You have two options as a listing agent. If you're in a listing contract with the seller, you can either say, okay, we're going to treat the buyer as a customer, just as you would at Target, at guest services like back in the day. And they're just going to basically fill in the blanks of the contract for you if they're willing to do that, and, kind of go from there. They cannot give you any advice or anything like that. They are still representing the seller. On the buyer's, the other side, they could become a transaction broker, which means they no longer are representing the seller's best interest, but they're representing the transaction, somewhat like a referee. And so if that's the case, still we cannot give advice. We take, basically we're the intermediary. We go back and forth. We say this is what they want on inspection and so on. So those are the two options, neither of which have representation in the buyer's best interest. So you got to figure that out. You got to see the homes, you got to go around, you got to understand what's going on. When we have limited inventory, typically you may be in a multiple offer situation and you may have to write that offer yourself depending on how that looks moving forward. And so as a result, first and foremost, the seller's probably not going to save a ton of money, because if I'm doing the work and writing the offer and becoming a transaction broker, or writing the offer in general for the buyer, it's probably going to cost the seller some money. And so that's where things can get a little bit less cheap for the buyer, so to speak. So we're going to get that contract written. We're going to talk about, all the things in, high intensity, kind of bidding wars or whatever. You may be asked if you want to waive your inspection, waive your appraisal, so on and so forth. Do your research before you do any of that, because it's of utmost importance. And sometimes we have different language that agents, use or is handed down by our attorneys and brokerages that can, escalate the price, or maybe do something with the appraisal, or offer to only ask for certain things or certain values on the inspections. Before you put any of those into a contract, I highly suggest that you have an attorney or somebody review that, again, costing you money as the buyer. So that's the next piece. Say we get under contract, say you did it, you're amazing, congratulations, you're under contract. Now we have the inspection, right? You have to find an inspector, a reputable inspector, schedule that, make sure you get all the right inspections. Definitely in Colorado, I suggest sewer and radon. There's a hint for you. But that's going to cost you about $1,000. You're going to get a report. Usually it's, over 50 pages, has a lot of red writing on it. Sometimes it's super, valuable. Sometimes it's literally just boilerplate stuff that is on most inspections. We never know, because ultimately, depending on how you found this inspector, you're going to have to, vet through that and make sure, okay, then you're going to go over here and you say, okay, this is what I want to ask for, right? In negotiations, it's smart to be strategic here and understand what usually is taken care of. You don't want to put a bunch of stuff that, a lead pipe that's feeding the water in the city of Denver that probably will be replaced by the city within the next 5 to 10 years. You probably don't want to ask the seller to do that. Although on the inspection, it's going to, look like it's a big safety hazard or whatever. So we're going to have that. You're going to decide what to object to, and hopefully you don't make the seller mad and they say, okay, we're done. We're not going to do any of it, because you have to kind of find that fine line and decide what's important to you and what's a non-negotiable. They do the same, and hopefully you come to a resolution without spending, too much money or taking on too much risk. After that, then we're through the inspection. We go to the appraisal. At the appraisal, right, you say the appraisal comes in low and you pulled in one of those appraisal gaps, and now you're on the hook for an extra $10, $15, $100,000, whatever you put in there, then that's a problem, right? What's this appraisal? What's it look like? At the appraisal, the buyer can, bring extra cash to the table if, in a general, with no, additional language and additional provisions. A buyer can bring extra cash to the table if they want. A seller can lower the price, right? Or somewhere in between. So you're in that negotiation, you're saying, okay, the seller's probably saying this is what it's worth, this is what you offered. You're probably saying, well, this guy says it's worth less. And so you have to understand, be able to read the appraisal, see if it's legit, see if there's any, questions that you can kind of contest or whatever. And then you go from there. Then we're on to the loan process. You may have a professional lender, or you may have just used an internet lender. This is where you're going to have to get them a ton of documents, and maybe the lender's late on a document or two because you chose a lender on the internet based on the cheapest rate, and you're going to actually have to negotiate that into the contract. All the while, if you pass that last loan availability deadline, your earnest money could be at risk. And so you have to make sure that you understand these things and these contracts and so on. So at the very least, have somebody review it, have an attorney review it. Agents, if they're not party to the contract, are probably not going to be able to do that for you. And so understand that there is going to be costs, and it's extremely important because one wrong term that you throw into the contract because they say, hey, do you want to put an appraisal gap? And you say, yeah, I want this house so bad, I'm so emotional about it, and you're willing to pay more than it's offered. To start with, you don't know what to offer, so you're just kind of going off the list price or going off the competition. And so certainly there's a lot of things that you can get yourself in trouble with within this process, right? Once we have the mortgage approval, then we have, the closing. How are you gonna, are you gonna conduct a final walkthrough? Are you gonna verify, have you verified that all the inspection things have been done? And so all of these things, as it lays out as a buyer, fall on you. And it's probably likely that at some point you're going to do something within that, if you don't know exactly what you're doing and how you're moving ahead, that you could cost yourself a little bit more money. Therefore, maybe, having a buyer's agent on your side who, if the settlement goes through, can negotiate the seller's side to pay the commission to a certain extent, or at the very least, you have the ability to negotiate with that agent. But at the end of the day, they're going to have your best interest. And especially on a first-time home buyer, say, the commission's $5,000, $10,000, whatever you guys negotiate, as they're 100% negotiable, it's more than worth it to help you walk through this process, not spend extra money on extra inspections, not, have the ability to possibly lose your earnest money if you don't perform because the lender didn't perform or something along those lines, or the inspection dates weren't met because there's 3 inspection dates and we don't understand them. So ultimately, the choice to not have representation, not hire a buyer's agent, could cost you a lot of money. And so all of these things are important to know as you navigate, not to mention the disclosures and all of the things that need to be explained, because, HOA documents and HOA communities and, property insurance and, special assessment coverage and all of those things are things that come into play that a professional typically walks you through and helps you understand as you're moving through the process. And it may just seem normal to you. It may just, if you're good with that, that's okay. But if you are proceeding without an agent, I highly recommend that you listen to this video again and go all the way through this and say, okay, am I really at a point where I can represent myself and not, leave money on the table? And certainly in some markets, it may be possible. And you may have done this for a long time. You may have had experience, with contractors or whatever. Absolutely go for it, right? If you have any questions, please reach out. Obviously I cannot, answer questions if you're, under contract or, in a brokerage relationship with another agent as a transaction broker. So you just got to be really careful with this, understand your rights and what's going on. Certainly it can be done. I just want to caution people of just reading these headlines, thinking that the buyer's agent is no longer going to be a possibility. And so, okay, now we're just going to go directly to the seller's agent. We're going to negotiate it ourselves. There may come a time where that's a possibility and there's the right education, right technology that can help you out. But now is probably not that time, especially because of the low inventory and so on. So if you're considering this, before you make any decisions, sign any contracts, I would be happy to sit down with you and have a conversation and, give you any insights. And it may be, I'll be completely honest, if you're ready to roll and you're dialed in and you know everything that's going on, you can absolutely go do that. If you have the time and the, energy and effort after your 9 to 5, your job, your career, to put into this, go do that. More power to you. Save a couple bucks, possibly, probably not, because now the seller's like, oh, well, I don't have to pay the buyer's agent commission. So they're not just going to be like, okay, I'm just going to give that to the buyer. No, the seller is interested in the net to them at the end of the day. And so if they have the ability to pull that, commission back and they think it's a savings, they're probably not just going to write it over to the buyer's agent, because the seller actually benefits from the buyer's agent having a professional representation so that they can assure themselves that they're going to get to the process and get to closing as best as possible. So just kind of think of all these things. I want to caution you and say, don't worry about the headlines right now. Certainly it may change. Certainly at some point you may be asked to, fulfill a commission that you've agreed upon with an agent. However, for now, I don't see a ton of that changing. If the settlement is signed how it is, I really don't see a lot of major changes to the industry besides these conversations. But just if you're doing this, proceed with caution. Before you do anything, book a call with me. I'd be happy to have a buyer consultation with you and answer any questions you might have and see if it's a possibility for you to move forward and, give you the keys to the car to do that. So I hope this helped. Please comment below and like, comment, subscribe. We'll be coming out with stuff as this kind of unfolds, as the kind of new way comes out. We will absolutely be doing this because I'm all about, educating the consumer and want you to do what's best for you in your situation and ultimately help you build wealth through real estate, no matter what it takes. We'll talk to you next time.